Well, that sounds like blasphemy.
He's gonna hurt the
I
children.
want that man arrested immediately.
We can't do that, sir. This is America.
Sir, this is a Wendy's drive-thru.
The only thing you have to fear is fear itself.
Hard times. The only salvation is to be good.
Won't go to church
Be
anymore.
good.
It seems the prevailing consensus among Christians for decades, and now many conspiracy researchers as well, is that the ancient gods and goddesses were deities that were worshipped. Many also believe, mostly because of Eric von Daniken and Zachariah Sitchin, that they were extraterrestrials that mated with humans and created humanity, and every country has their own creation story that's the same, and they all talk about aliens. Well, that's complete bullshit, and I'm going to set the record straight once and for all. First of all the ancient gods and goddesses, whether from Sumer, Greater Mesopotamia, India, Egypt, Greece, or Rome, were all representations of nature. The primary elements were their disguise for the uninitiated. To the initiated, they were all symbolic representations of the magic mushroom. This is confirmed to me after I found images, all over 2,000 years old, of every known deity with either mushrooms growing out of their heads, or holding a mushroom in their hands, or mushrooms being artistically included in their overall design. We'll start with Sumer, where we see images of Anu, the sky god, depicted in mushroom dress along with Ninhursag. These are some of the oldest representations, all of which come from scrolls. We often see date palms, which could be a double for the mushroom. Remember, everything is esoteric and occulted for the uninitiated. There's always a cover story for the general population who see and interpret the pictograms but are not allowed to know the true hidden meaning. When we look at the images, it's one thing to interpret them based on what we see visually, but it's also important to compare the character depictions to their stories. In every case, we'll find the story actually talks about magic mushrooms, but it's also properly veiled. All of the main ancient myth stories from Sumer and Mesopotamia are covered in depth in ancient Psychedelia. The Epic of Gilgamesh is one of the oldest stories from Sumer. The tale of Marduk, called the Enuma Elish, is another epic from the same era. All in all, when the Library of Nineveh was excavated and texts were translated, it turned out many of the texts were the same retellings of similar ancient myths and stories. In other words, in all of the Middle East, the creation stories are mostly the same and expressed in their myth. Adapa in the Great Wind, Atrahasis, the story of the flood with the original Noah, etc. When you study these texts seriously, you realize, like Sir James G. Fraser and Joseph Campbell, that all myth is centered around nature and the elements, not off-planet species. When you learn to decode the mythology, you realize it all revolves around one thing, the magic mushroom. Gilgamesh is a demigod. He is seeking to acquire immortality. Immortality is a key feature around myth because the mushroom causes one's ego to undergo a form of death and rebirth, otherwise known as being reborn. Understanding that death is transitory and not permanent, the devotee or disciple becomes aware that they indeed live forever through the spirit. For now, they're only in the flesh. Marduk slays Tiamat, the great dragon of the deep, a leviathan. After slaying Tiamat, he takes out the heart and holds it up as an offering to Shamash. This is symbolic of the slaying and harvesting of the mushroom. This is also a recurring theme in mushroom mythology and symbolism, as you'll discover in an upcoming presentation on ritual sacrifice, beheadings, and cannibalism. So much talk about the Anunnaki these days and the Nephilim. These are completely unrelated to each other, and most are ignorant of this. The Anunnaki were also called the Seven Sages or the Apkallu. They were supposed to have taught mankind the arts and sciences, raised up mankind intellectually. Symbolism for the mushroom, that's all. They are seen picking pine cones from the tree of life. Why? Because Amanita muscaria only grow in symbiotic relationship with conifers, pine trees, and oaks. The mushroom is the fruit of the tree of knowledge, another topic to be covered later. The basket they are holding is called a situla. It was a leather pouch originally carried by the shaman, which contained his collected urine. The Amanita muscaria metabolites stay active in the urine and can be recycled up to 5 times to reproduce the effects. Leaving Egypt aside for now, following the Sumerians and the Babylonians came the Hittites. Lots of Hittite imagery with mushrooms exist, compared to the scant imagery from Sumer. You have to keep in mind that the stories came first. Centuries or millennium later, they were depicted on stone scrolls or tablets, so sometimes the only images we have of, say, Gilgamesh were Assyrian Hittite several thousand years after the height of Sumer. Fortunately, though, we have the myth and stories to look at and compare. At this point, it's important to note we're dealing with 2 distinct kinds of mushrooms that get you high. One of them, the red-cap Amanita muscaria, and the other, the blue-stem psilocybin. Always keep these two important colors in mind, red and blue. Amanitas grow under pines and conifers only. Psilocybin grows in all kinds of climates and conditions worldwide, but they're especially known for growing from bull or cow dung. This is the reason the bull and cow were held sacred in the earliest Indian times. It's also where we get the term holy cow or holy shit. Lots of imagery depict bulls in scenes where secret mushroom symbolism occurs. You'll often see the occulted mushroom somewhere in the vicinity of the bull, especially in places like Gobekli Tepe in India, which will be covered in the next episode. Very early on, there was a shift from matrilineal to patriarchal, and this is fully evident by the time we arrive at Sumer. All the deities are warlike, conquering, and masculine. This was not the case in Minoan Crete or in early India when the Rig Veda was written. The men had broken off from the clan tribes and formed cattle herds and went nomadic, leading to the Indo-Aryan invasions throughout the Middle East. This is very prominent in the imagery on the wall engravings and stelas. This split led to a creation of kingship in Sumer. This male-led patriarchal kingship then created slavery and used slavery to mine gold and other precious minerals from the ground. The whole reason the Sumerians invented writing was because they lost their ability to recall from memory vast quantities of material. The Druidic bards were said to have memorized the equivalent of 3 or 4 Bibles worth of material. This is how the Rig Veda was kept alive for thousands of years before being written down. On to the Nephilim, the giants, the fallen ones, the watchers. What were they? Well, there are 2 kinds of giants in the Bible, the fallen ones and the giants like David and Goliath, which I'll cover in a later chapter on fairy tales. The fallen ones, or the Nephilim, are the topic of our discussion here. In this entire presentation, I did my best to present everything based in fact, not speculation, but this I place more into the speculation folder for the time being. If the character of a worldwide mythos is the mushroom, then it makes perfect sense that the giants mentioned several times might just be the trees the Amanita muscaria grows in symbiosis with. I don't subscribe to the idea that the Devil's Towers are these trees, but now petrified. I don't know. I do know this. I've collected some interesting information for my ideas. The Anakites are associated with the Nephilim, who are also called the Rephaim. In Deuteronomy 2:19-20, we hear of the Ammonites living in the land of the Rephaim. This is where the sons of the Anakim dwelled. In Joshua 17:15, we learn that the land of the Rephaim was in the forests. Joshua said to them, "If you are a numerous people, go up to the forest and clear a place for yourself there in the land of the Perizzites and of the Rephaim, since the hill country of Ephraim is too narrow for you." In Genesis 14:5, we read that the kings defeated the Rephaim in Ashtaroth Karnaim. Asherahs were the trees that were worshipped, where the goddess temples were in the groves. This tells me the kings cut down all the giant trees with the axes. They were living among the sons of the Anakim. Where can we go up? Our brethren have made our hearts melt, saying, "The people are bigger and taller than we. The cities are large and fortified to heaven. And besides, we saw the sons of the Anakim there." Deuteronomy 1:28. Slaying them was compared to removing the fruit from a tree which has been felled. Yet it was I who destroyed the Amorite before them, though his height was like the height of cedars, and he was as strong as oaks. I even destroyed his fruit above and his root below. Amos 2:9. In Daniel 4, we read about the dream of Nebuchadnezzar. It reads as follows: "In the visions I saw while lying in bed, I looked, and there before me was a holy one, a messenger coming down from heaven. He called in a loud voice, 'Cut down the tree and trim off its branches, strip off its leaves and scatter its fruit. Let the animals flee from under it and the birds from its branches. But let the stump and its roots, bound with iron and bronze, remain in the ground, in the grass of the field.'" Now, the mountains like Devil's Tower could have been the inspiration for these kind of fables, but not the other way around. They would not be petrified if cut down just a few thousand years ago. But it seems very likely to me that the characters referred to as the Nephilim were the giants and the fallen ones, because the kings cut them all down with the axes. That's my theory, and I'm sticking to it. If you don't like it, debunk it then. We'll be moving on to India next, possibly the world's oldest civilization, due to its retention in some districts of the matrilineal clans which preceded the rise of Sumer. Sumer had no matrilineal clans. We might be mistaken to assume that the first people to write things down were the most civilized. This concludes the presentation titled You Can't Unsee It, Episode 2, The Anunnaki in Mesopotamia. For more information on this subject, visit AncientPsychedelia.com and check out the free online version of the book, Ancient Psychedelia, Alien Gods and Mushroom Goddesses. Thanks for watching. One last thing I should mention, if you enjoyed this video and you'd like to support me in my work, here are several ways you can do that. It does help tremendously, and I really appreciate it.